Okay, so should be recording now. Let's have a look through what I've added. I've disabled this save data thing that you'd done, um, just to make sure you've got a few errors, but I've mostly just disabled things that were erroring for you to come back to later. Right, so looking in our main script, I'm adding a data store service, game get service, data store service, and we're going to add a data store. So we use the data store service, get data store, and I've just called it test store 01. I generally call it something like test or test store while you're working on the game, and then when you're ready to release, change this name, and it will be. If you ever change this name, it will reset all the saves because it will basically be pointing like at a different file, so to speak, a different data store. Um, then we use we got the player added thing, doing a normal player added bit, and in here we got the character added, um, doing all of that. And when we add the character, that's when we're going to load the game. Um, Actually, I've just realised we want that. Oh no, sorry. After the character added, we're going to load the game. That makes more sense. I was a bit worried then that I'd done something terribly wrong and I was going to load the game every single time we added the character. But I want to do the character added stuff before we do the loading the data stuff, because otherwise it will probably interfere with the um, the billboard stuff appearing. But but it's still inside the player added event. So when a character joins, when a player joins the server, this is the event that runs, and near the end of that is where we're going to load the game. So the actual bit that's doing the loading is this little section here. The rest of this is just to make sure that it loads. So yes, it might look a bit complicated, but it's not as complicated as it seems. Let's focus on what's actually doing the loading first. Um, we've got this section here. Okay, so local success and data. So initializing two variables here to a pcall. So the pcall is like a wrap that means that if something inside this function errors, it can just continue on and act like nothing happened. Well, actually, it will act like something happened. It will return success, return false to success, and data will return the actual error message, the error type, the error code. Um, so then inside this, we're going to return, and when we return something from a pcall, it will put it in this second variable. So it will put it in this data, and then we're going to look in the data store. We're going to get async, and then we're going to give it the key. The key is going to be ID underscore and then the player user ID. Just doing that to make sure that it's a string by using this ID bit here. It doesn't have to be. We could actually just use the player user ID. It's not the end of the world. It is a string, so it should work fine. But it's quite normal to put something like here, like player or ID, player ID, key, all sorts of things. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't actually matter what you call it. It's just good practice to put another bit of string in there. Yeah, and so when this will return it to the data. Then we're going to check if it was successful, and if it was successful, then we're going to. Oh, well, so now that's all well and hunky dory if it works, but if it fails, then your game's just going to continue, and you'll start the game as if you was a new player. And then when it comes to leaving the game and saving your data, you're going to save the new data over the top of the old data, which we obviously don't want to do. Um, so we're going to make a variable called loaded and set it to false, just a boolean, and we're going to set a variable of attempt so that we don't keep trying to load their data forever if the servers are all down or something like that. And then we run a while loop. So while it's not loaded, so while loaded is false and attempts are less than 6, we're going to load the data. If it's successful, then we're going to set the best time to the data that's loaded, And if it's not, if it's successfully loaded, but the data is still nil, it means that it's the first time they've ever played the game, so we're just going to set it to 0. And then after that, we're setting loaded to true because it loaded, so now it'll break out of this while loop. Could use break, but I'd like to do it this way around. In fact, break would be a little bit better because then it's not going to wait anymore. But anyway, see, that's true. Let's just add that. We want to have a break there. Then we don't have to wait again, and the attempts don't matter because we're breaking from the loop. Yep, so then we're going to increment attempt by 1, so that it's now the next time we go through it'll be the second attempt and the third attempt and so on until it reaches 6 and doesn't do it anymore. That's great. So then we also need to do in the player removing, we need to save the data. So same thing. We're getting the player from the player removing, and we're going to get their time alive and the best time data, because we want to make sure that if, let's say, they've got a bigger time alive left at the time they log off, we still need to set that to the best time. It'd be a bit disappointing if you survived all that time and then you logged off or the game crashed, and even though you'd survived for hours and you'd earned loads of points, you lost them all because you didn't actually die, which, yeah, it'd be terribly unfair. So we would just make sure that we're going to get the time alive and set that to this, and then we're going to do the same kind of thing with a while loop. So if it's saved, we're going to equal false, attempt is 1, while not saved, and attempt is less than 6. Exactly the same thing. And now we're doing success and fail because we don't have anything to return in this pcall. We're just going to set the data. We're just going to save the data. I'm just assigning it to a variable because I prefer to write things out that way in case I come back to this and I need to do something else with it. Or I want to print it out, or anything else. It's good to assign it to a variable, though not technically necessary. So the data store set async this time. You've got to be careful with set async because it will quite happily overwrite its data, like I said. So if you load it into the game and the load failed, and then you leave and the save is successful, you've just overwritten their save data with a new player's thing. So I do tend to, in my game, it's up to you, but I tend to, in my games, have it that if this, where's the save function gone? It's just here, yeah. So if all of this actually fails, so if it ever gets to the end of this, if it breaks from this, if success keeps failing, then I will kick the player to protect their data. There are probably other ways you could just make it so they're marked so it doesn't save their data and they can continue to play. But my general thought is like, there's no point in them playing the game. Just kick them out. But it's user preference, I suppose. Right, so yeah, that's that. We also, this bit here with the updating the time, that's the other thing I did in the died connection. So when they die, we check if the time alive is higher than the best time, and if it is, then we set the best time to the current time alive before giving all the stats to giving the killer their time alive and setting the time alive back to 0. Yeah, marvelous. And if we jump in, we shall see that I've got a best time of 21. Oh, music. Let's just turn that off a second. And there we go. Get some more time. I suppose I'll have to hang around for a few seconds. I might be able to time lapse this. Okay, and as you can see, it's higher now. And if we reset the character, That's fine. Oof. And now the best time is 28. Let's do the same thing again. Let's take it up to 30 seconds and leave the game. Although this is something to be aware of. The player removing quite often doesn't work when you're testing on a local client test server in Studio. But that doesn't mean that your data store doesn't work. I'll show you again in a second. If this doesn't work, we'll jump into a team test, and that will work. Or you could jump into the game proper, and that would also work. There we go, so that's good. And let's say leave. And now if I jump into a team test, it should have remembered that it's over 30, or 30 or over. No, it hasn't. But like I said, that's mainly because of the way that does that. Okay. And now if we now leave the game, it should have remembered. There we go. All good.